Mayoral Candidate Forum on Transportation, Equity, and the Environment, hosted by the Move All Seattle Sustainably, Mass Coalition, and other allied organizations. Our co-sponsoring organizations are 350 Seattle, Action, Cascade Bicycle Club, Seattle Neighborhood Greenways, Seattle Subway, Sunrise Seattle, Transportation Choices Coalition, Transit Riders Union, and The Urbanist. And we'll be hearing from candidates running for Mayor of Seattle as they answer questions from our moderator, Erica C. Barnett. Erica is a local reporter covering politics, transportation, housing, homelessness, and urbanism. And she's been a writer and editor at publications such as Huffington Post, The Stranger, Seattle Weekly, Shakespeare, the Austin Chronicle, and many more. And also her own website, Publicola. She's the author of Quitter, a memoir of drinking relapse and recovery, which was published last year. And you can find her at publicola.com or on Twitter at Publicola News. All of our questions were submitted to Erica from all of the co-sponsoring organizations, as well as from audience members who submitted questions during registration. We'll also be taking questions from the audience during the forum tonight through the Q&A box. So make sure that you're entering your questions there in the Q&A box rather than in the chat box. Our captioning is available and can be shown or hidden on your device as you prefer. And we'll also be sharing a recording and a transcript after the event. Before I get started, I'd also like to invite you to mark your calendars for next Tuesday, June 22nd, for our forum for City Council Position 9 candidates. And I can put that information into the chat box as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to our moderator, Erica. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Kelsey. Good evening, everybody. It's an honor to be with all of you here tonight, hosting this forum for the Mass Coalition and all the sponsor organizations that have made this conversation possible. Tonight, you'll hear from the leading mayoral candidates directly about their positions on issues including transportation, equity, sustainability, land use, and more. The format for tonight is as follows. We'll kick things off with a 2-minute introductory statement from each candidate, followed by questions that each of the candidates will have an opportunity to answer. And those questions, we've made an executive decision because we have so many great questions from the members of the coalition and members of the public, will be 90-second answers, so talk fast. And you're not obligated to take the entire 90 seconds. We are on a tight schedule, so please stick to that timeline. Just remember that the more quickly you can respond, the more questions we'll be able to get to. And then after the general questions, we will have a lightning round of yes or no and very short answer questions. A brief programming note, Colleen Echohawk and Casey Sixkiller were not able to attend tonight's forum, and we're hoping that a surrogate for Colleen will be joining us shortly. In the meantime, it is my honor to introduce the candidates for Mayor of Seattle. Tonight with us, we have Justin Farrell, Lorena Gonzalez, Bruce Harrell, Andrew Grant Houston, and Lance Randall. And we'll start, as I said, with an opening statement from each candidate, starting with Justin Farrell.
Good evening. Thank you, Erica, and thank you to everyone who has hosted this forum this evening. My name is Justin Farrell, and I am a candidate for mayor. I am a single mom of 3, and I think my 6-year-old's about to make an appearance. Okay, and we'll see how far I get. I'm former executive director of Transportation Choices Coalition, and I have you know what? I am going to have to ask for your forgiveness and see if we can switch around. I'm going to be right back. Thank you.
We'll go next to Lorena Gonzalez.
I'd be all too happy to pitch in as a mom myself here. Thank you, Erica and Mass Coalition for organizing this really important event. I'm Lorena Gonzalez. I am currently the president of the Seattle City Council, and I was first elected to the Seattle City Council in 2015 as the first Latinx person elected to a citywide office in the history of the city. I'm looking to be Seattle's next mayor and to, in this historic race, become the first Latinx person of a major U.S. city on the West Coast to become mayor. And I am a proud daughter of immigrants. I'm a proud woman of color. I'm a first-time mom, and I am also an avid transit rider and love to also commute by bicycle. I have a vision for this city, and the vision for this city is to build a 15-minute city with complete neighborhoods that are connected, that have everything you need when you step out of it. In order to do that, we're going to have to build a strong coalition. And the Mass Coalition has been critical to some of the achievements I have been able to work on as a council member, from the Georgetown to South Park bike trail connection to many other very important infrastructure developments throughout the city. I want to be able to build on that progressive record. I want to be able to make sure that I put my relationships with the city council to work to move an agenda forward that is bold and that will not just take us back to the way we were pre-COVID, but actually work towards helping us reimagining, reinvigorating, and really taking seriously the charge of the comp plan that is going to be put forward in 2024, but not waiting until 2024 to begin the hard work of building a city that is truly a 15-minute city. I look forward to the questions, and thank you again so much for having me here.
Thank you. Now we will go back to Jess and Farrell.
Thank you so very much for your patience. We are all settled over here. So again, I'm Jessin Farrell, running for mayor of Seattle. I am the mother of three. You met one of them, who is 6 years old. I am also the former executive director of Transportation Choices, a former state legislator, and most recently I was the chair of the governor's task force on economic recovery, where we focused on getting relief into small business owners who had been left out of federal pandemic programs. I am running for mayor because this is a moment where we need to turn words into action. We need to stop the infighting and build bridges. And most importantly, we need to stop patting ourselves on the back for incrementalism and get the big, large scale solutions that we need to tackle our toughest problems. And I have been doing that my entire career. I've helped get in place $80 billion in transit, pedestrian, and bike infrastructure. I helped negotiate paid family leave as a legislator and with Republicans. And prior to 2017, you could get fired for being pregnant. I helped change that. So I am running because we need to go big on housing. I'm committed to 70,000 units of affordable housing across the city. We need to get to zero gun deaths. We need to get to zero carbon emissions by 2030. And we need to get to zero pedestrian deaths. And the same leadership is not going to get us there. So I am really looking forward to earning your support. I'm looking forward to your questions. And once again, thank you so much for having us this evening.
Thank you. And we are working on getting a solution for timing of these responses, but you guys are doing great so far. So next we'll go to Bruce Harrell.
Notice how you mentioned the timing when I start. Is that an insinuation I'm going to take too long?
Not at all, Bruce. Although you just used up 4 or 5 of your seconds.
That's okay. Now that we're at the timing. Well, thanks for having me. I look forward to this discussion, because what's interesting on this campaign trail is, you know, the issues of place reform and homelessness and business revitalization have sort of dominated many of the discussions. And there have been parts where we are talking about some of the basic components of our system that are so critical, whether it is pedestrian safety or vision zero or climate change or the walkability of our city. So I'm very proud to say that one of the angles on all of the issues I've been working is revealing all of the data. When we look at what it costs to repair a sidewalk, what it will cost to implement vision zero, when we're looking at, you know, taking down 75% of our arterials down to 25 miles an hour. I've had to lead some very difficult discussions in areas of the town where people are still reliant on fossil fueled vehicles. And I've done this with a lens of safety, walkability, health, and that's why part of my platform is a healthy for all Seattle, a healthy Seattle, which is modeled after what is in San Francisco, to make sure people who fall through the cracks have health care. I will lead with environmental justice when we're looking at air quality and water quality and access to food, in terms of what, again, is a healthy ecosystem for all to live in. You know, our commitment as a city to climate change and to a walkable, livable, exciting city to live in, I think we all share that. But what we don't share right now, I think, is the public trust that people have faith. The public has faith when we ask for more money through levies that we are spending our money wisely. So I'll close by saying that under my leadership, under my race and data initiative and some of the technology platforms that I will introduce, we will regain the city's trust such that they will realize that the investments we are asking them to make are truly smart investments and effective investments. And with that, I hope that you'll look at my candidacy favorably.
All right, next up, as I turn off my timer, next up, Andrew Grant Houston.
Good afternoon, and hello to my fellow members of the Mass Coalition. My name is Andrew Grant Houston. Many of you know me better as Ace, the architect. I'm queer, Black, and Latino, and I moved to Seattle mainly for job opportunities, but also because it has the best transit system in the US. And that also is to say that we can go significantly better if we are going to achieve a 15-minute city ideal, not just in our transit, but also in our housing and allowing for housing to occur in every single one of our neighborhoods. We have had a number of mayors in the past make really large promises in terms of what they were going to do. Case in point, Mayor Durkin, who said she was a huge transit champion and would be the first climate mayor, only to stall the streetcar and to defund the Department of Transportation. And in my mind, it is imperative, if we are not only going to be a city that works for all of our residents, but if we are truly going to achieve housing justice as well as transit justice and environmental justice, then we need someone not only with lived experience, but with clear and concrete plans in order to achieve that 15-minute city ideal. And I believe I am the candidate for that.
Thanks, and next we'll go to Lance Randall.
Good evening. Thanks for the opportunity to be here tonight. My name is Lance Randall. I am an economic development practitioner, political scientist, entrepreneur, and a musician. I've worked on every level of government, from the federal government to state government and municipal government. I've worked for the city of Seattle for 8 years doing economic development, working with businesses, large and small, all around the city, solving problems, and a lot of those problems had to do with transportation. My candidacy is a response to the voters in the city of Seattle who have expressed their frustration over the failed leadership that we have in City Hall. It's time for something different. It's time for something new. It's not time to bring back people who had an opportunity to do it before and walked away. It's not time to continue on the current leadership that has taken us down a path of destruction. It is time for something completely new, someone with a plan of action, the ability and the background to get it done. And that's why I'm offering myself as a candidate for mayor. Transportation is essential to Seattle's economic growth and the revitalization of its downtown. A well-maintained and fully functioning infrastructure is necessary for efficient and safe mobility in Seattle. And the mobility includes everything from trucks, freight, bikes, pedestrians, what have you. We have to make sure we have an excellently maintained safe transportation system, and make sure that our first responders have good roads and sidewalks in order to respond to the people who need our help. And we also need to make sure that our Department of Transportation is functioning properly. I'm offering a plan that will put together a infrastructure and maintenance situation for the city of Seattle, will keep everyone safely connected. There's no excuse for some of the things that have happened with our bridges and our roads, and it's time to do something different. I'm ready to step in the mayor's position to get things done. It's time to stop talking and make things happen. I look forward to conversation.
Thank you. And last, we have Matt Brimley, who is standing in for Colleen Echohawk and presenting a 2-minute statement on her behalf.
Thank you, Erica. Hello, my name is Matt Brimley, and I was asked to read a statement on behalf of my friend Colleen Echohawk, who could not be here tonight due to a family commitment. My name is Colleen Echohawk, and her career has been dedicated to serving the homeless and the least powerful people in one of the world's richest cities. End youth homelessness by 2021. Vision Zero, carbon neutrality. What do they all have in common? Empty promises. I am Native American and know all about empty promises. Advocates fight hard, secure commitments, and plans get made, but then when it comes time to make the tough choices, The courage to make change is lost and plans are delayed or dropped or watered down and completely forgotten. I am running because it is time for a new generation of leadership. We need leaders who have the courage to change. We need to solve the humanitarian crisis of homelessness. We will have roughly 5,000 people sleeping outside tonight. We need to reform the police department and hold police officers accountable. Poor people, homeless people, Black and brown people should not be ticketed, harassed, or even killed like our brother John T. Williams, just for moving around our community. We must stop building highways, especially through Black and brown communities. And as asthma goes up, global warming accelerates. We must end exclusionary zoning and legalize housing in every neighborhood. Housing justice, mobility justice, climate justice are all the same fight. Do we build a city that works for all of us, for the next generation, or do we keep finding reasons to maintain the status quo? I am and have been a fighter for housing justice. I have not been a part of the system that always has a reason to water down the promises to just empty words. I do not owe any interest, anything. I owe everything to the people who brought me to this opportunity, and I intend to make the most of it. I would love for us to join together in the fight for justice, and I'd love to support you. Sorry?
I was saying that
Comrade?
if you could wrap up your sentence and we'll move on.
That was pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, the first question, and again, these are 90-second responses. We'll go to Lorena Gonzalez. Seattle's greenhouse gas emissions are not on track to meet our city's stated climate goals. Transportation accounts for 60% of Seattle's emissions, so shifting to low carbon modes like transit, biking, walking, and rolling is a climate necessity. If elected, what is the highest impact action you would take to make this happen?
You know, I think it's a really important question. I mean, I think the reality is that complete livable neighborhoods lead to less reliance on using a car to get around. And so we have to build a city that gives people an incentive to get out of the cars and stay in their neighborhoods. So, you know, I have lived in the Junction for many years, and when I am not on the bus getting to work, I am walking around my neighborhood, not using my car. My car is in the garage. We can build that kind of city across every single neighborhood in the city of Seattle. I think that is the most important thing we can do, is dismantle exclusionary zoning laws that create the most expensive and the less climate-friendly buildings for living in across the city, and those are single-family homes.
Great. Next up, Bruce Harrell. You have 90 seconds.
I think during the Move Seattle levy discussion, we will have a very granular discussion to sort of figure out the answer. So if I were to say right now, I would say, of course, continue to build out the transit lanes where we can get as creative as possible to buy as many hours as humanly possible to make sure, in another forum we talked about free transit. And so when I took free transit a little step further to encourage transit was to look at, through electric vehicles, whether we can use our existing rideshare system, where we have not been successful in getting information, but I want to be able to get the information to determine how we could even make free east-west connections available, shuttle services available to get people to transit, such that we have a robust transit network. So under the relationships that I've established and will build, I'm confident that we can find ways to establish free transit, free or reduced rates for east-west connectivity, and make sure that we can encourage that. I would also say in increasing the data that I want to expose to the public, such that they could do data mining, we could look at building more of a walkable city. The sidewalk plan that will take 300 years or whatever the god-awful number is to build out, I think we could open up the data to find a more effective way to do build-outs throughout the city to make it more walkable.
Thank you. Next, we are going to go to Andrew.
So I think it's important to think about this in a holistic way and also really acknowledge that when it comes to that 60% of emissions, it is 50% that is specifically single occupancy vehicles. So that means people who are using their cars and their trucks, not for business, not for freight, not for buses, but specifically just driving. And so we need to get people to shift over to buses, bikes, and other methods of mobility, but do so safely. That is one of the reasons why one of my main proposals is putting buses back on the ballot in 2022. So reinstating the VLF that we dropped off now that Tim Eyman's lawsuit is gone. I find it imperative for us to restore service to what we had pre-COVID so that we can do a county-wide measure to use and actually execute the Metro Connect plan that is currently planned for 2040 and actually have that in place by 2030. The other side of that is housing, and that's something I truly understand as an architect. So I'm not only committed to land use reform, I'm also committed to reform to design review, specifically having an exemption for net zero buildings. I don't believe if a building is being designed sustainably that it should actually go through a process that makes those buildings more energy intensive in terms of what they use. And as we see in our greenhouse gas emissions inventory, buildings are also the second largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in Seattle.
Thanks. We'll now turn to Lance. And again, the question is, transportation accounts for 60% of emissions, and we need to shift to low carbon options. And what is the highest impact action you would take if elected to accomplish this?
Great question. The first thing I would do is to support Seattle City Light's focus on updating our electric infrastructure to adapt to climate change. And I will encourage frequent review of the climate change adaptation plan to make sure that the planning includes the latest technology and updated climate forecast. The other thing that I want to do is continue to make investments in electrified transportation, including incentivizing investments in infrastructure for both private and city-owned electric cars, electric vehicles, electric bikes and scooters, and electric power public transportation, which means that we're going in a good direction, just need to continue to do such and make sure that these plans are moving forward the way that they're designed to do.
All right, next and finally on this question, Justin Farrell.
So we know how to build a city that is low carbon, but the question is, why haven't we? Why haven't we put in place these policies? Why hasn't the city council, why hasn't the mayor prioritized these in the last 15 years? The hour is very, very late on the issue of climate change. It is time to address this with urgency, and we know how to get people out of their cars. We can look at the UPass program at the UW. In 1990, 70% of people commuted onto that campus driving alone. By 95, 30% were. Why was that? Nearly free transit through the UPass program, great transit access, and walking and biking infrastructure that get you to where you want to go. We need to do that citywide. The time is now.
Thank you. All right, the next question is going to go first to Bruce, and it's about Vision Zero, which is the goal of eliminating all pedestrian and bicycle deaths and serious injuries. We're not on track to meet Vision Zero. In fact, we've gone backwards. How will you as mayor eliminate pedestrian and bicyclist injuries and deaths? And how would you get the program back on target?
Thank you. So I like to use the example of a seatbelt to describe my commitment to Vision Zero. That years ago, a seatbelt was seen as an inconvenience or something people didn't want to do, but through education and evangelizing the need for seatbelts, now it's just commonplace. Everyone knows immediately, and there's a law. So I think that we have to use technology again in terms of automated enforcement in certain piloted areas to normalize behavior to make sure we slow it down. The education component is there's a strong race and social justice argument that we have to make, because you look at a lot of the areas where we have increased deaths. It's all throughout the city, but there's also a racial disparate impact as well. So I think we lead with education. We use piloted automated cameras, which, by the way, removes police bias in who is stopped. And then I think, again, we open up the data so people can see exactly why we have to slow things down. And again, I've led these discussions, and some very difficult discussions because people are always in a hurry. And so what I try to explain to people that nothing is in such a hurry that we can't, number one, save the planet and save lives. So again, I will evangelize the need for our commitment to Vision Zero. I've done it before and look forward to doing it if elected as mayor.
Next up, Andrew.
So I'm not going to mince words about this. We need to make it harder to drive in the city. And I know that just reducing the maximum miles per hour on a street doesn't make it automatically that people will actually drive slower. As someone who's not just an architect, but an urban designer, I know that we actually have to redesign our cities, retake the right-of-way that we have as city and through SDOT, and actually give that back to pedestrians. Give that back to bicyclists, make fully protected bike lanes, not with flex posts, but with actual concrete barriers so that anyone of any age, of any ability has the safety that they need to feel comfortable to be able to bike. One of the biggest issues that we have is that it's not necessarily about understanding who or who not is committing these crimes or these, I don't even want to call them accidents, they're incidents. But it's really about preventing them in the first place. And so if we are trying to reduce the number of accidents where we are involved with cars, which are 6,000-pound vehicles or more, in these spaces where we have pedestrians and also where we have forced most of our housing to be, most of our commercial spaces are to be on these arterials, we need to make a clear decision. And as we become a more sustainable city, my decision is that we need to give that space back away from cars and to people.
Lance Randall is next.
So to ensure safety for everyone who is using transportation infrastructure, it is important for us to upgrade our traffic movement, signal, and crosswalk technology to improve safety. This includes technology options to reduce the number of vehicles that run through traffic signals, red lights, sound alerts at crosswalks to assist the blind and those who are otherwise occupied. In order to do that, we need to review the transportation priorities that were identified in the 2015 Levy to Move Seattle. We have to make some adjustments because of COVID on some of the projects, and we need to prioritize the project in such a way that we are taking care of the issues that need to be addressed first, with a focus on the communities and neighborhoods that have been ignored over the past few years, to make sure that priority is placed in those areas first to do the improvements of the infrastructure. So take a look at what we have in place already, capitalize on it, we prioritize and focus on the communities that need safety the most.
Next, Justin Farrell.
Vision Zero is one of my core priorities and one of the reasons I'm running for mayor. You know, pedestrian safety isn't just about safety, it's also about agency and freedom and how our most vulnerable users are able to get to where they need to go, whether they're very young or elderly or have special needs. It is fundamentally around the freedom to be able to get to school and medical appointments and shopping and work. And there are places in this city that have been so dangerous for so long. North Aurora, Rainier Ave, Beacon Ave. There are so many places where the pedestrian infrastructure is missing or downright scary. That's why I'm so excited to be running on 100 miles of Stay Healthy Streets, using the Safe Routes to School model, where you create paths and places that get people to where they want to go. Pedestrians are using our transportation network to get to where they want to go, and we need to be investing and prioritizing in those things that will help people have the agency and freedom that a good transportation network provides.
And last, Lorena Gonzalez.
Thanks so much for the question. You know, I have two reference points on the issue related to Vision Zero. The first, my first example is always thinking about my husband, Cameron, who a few years ago was hit by a motorist while he was on his bike doing a training ride. He's an avid cyclist and used to cycle professionally. The second is my trip to Copenhagen, where I had an opportunity to look at what it means to build a city that is designed not for cars, but for people walking, for people rolling, and for all people of all ages and abilities. That's the city I want to build if elected to be the next mayor of the city. 24 people died in 2020 in our city as a result of preventable things that are within the city's control that have not been completed by the executive. So this is an opportunity for us to, once again, build a city that doesn't focus on car-centered street designs, but focuses on building infrastructure, sidewalks, pedestrianized streets. I love the stay healthy, keep moving streets, but they are still mixed modalities. We need to eliminate cars on those stay healthy streets to make sure that they continue to be safe and will be safe for those of us who are not in a steel machine.
Thank you. So with the next question, we're going to start with Andrew Grant Houston. What are your priorities for sound transit realignment and station planning in Seattle? How would you win the rest of the Sound Transit Board over to your side on those priorities?
Well, I think the biggest thing that we need to do is to bring those projects on time, if not actually speed them up. That is one of my biggest concerns, and it has been even before the deficit. I thought about us redeveloping what is now Climate Pledge Arena, and the fact that we have planned for transit to go directly there through the link, but we are actually not opening at the same time. And so we are now asking thousands of people to come and drive their cars down through the Mercer Mess. And that's even before we have actually planned for these other items. I think it's really a priority for me to work through a lot of the politics at the state level and figure out why they are so vehemently against giving us funding for sound transit. It is something where we need to find not just new funding in order to fill that gap, but also sustainable funding, and also make a case at the federal level. Something that I've been advocating for, especially as a member of the Sunrise Movement and now a member of the Working Families Party, is the Thrive Act, so that we can have $1 trillion to be invested every single year across the US. It's an issue where infrastructure is necessary to be upgraded, including our bridges, and also improved in order to actually expand transit, both here in Seattle as well as in other jurisdictions. And so everyone in the US needs help if we are actually going to achieve our climate goals.
Next up, Lance Randall.
Can you repeat the question again, please?
Sure. The question was, let me just go back. The question was about, I'll just repeat it from memory, sound transit realignment. What would you prioritize specifically in Seattle during sound transit's realignment, and how would you convince the rest of the Sound Transit Board to support your priority?
Well, I think one of the priorities we have to take a look at is the businesses around the transportation corridors that are being built by Sound Transit. I want to specifically point out the Rainier Avenue, not Rainier Avenue, but MLK, and how the light rail is going through there, and there are not a lot of businesses that have been able to capitalize on that link rail coming through. I think that what we have to do, and I see where someone is making movement, is make investments in those trans-oriented development sites that have been vacant, in order to try to build up around these stations and along these corridors, so that the businesses can benefit from the traffic that is coming through Sound Transit, and the communities can benefit by having an opportunity for businesses to create wealth and grow the businesses in those areas and create jobs. So I think the key priority is as we continue to support and provide leadership for local, regional, and national funding for these projects, and they depend a lot on Seattle, we need to make sure that we're partnering with Sound Transit, that as we do these corridors, that we are building opportunities for job creation and wealth for those individuals who live along those corridors. And I think that's the best way to bring them on board, to see that there's more opportunity than just building infrastructure, but there's also opportunity to create job and support communities.
Justin Farrell.
This is one of my most favorite opportunities to be mayor of Seattle, which is to defend our interests and promote them. And I've been doing that my whole career, whether it's beating the highway lobby in Bellevue and making sure that light rail was the preferred alternative across I-90, making sure that Pierce County suburban electeds were saving transit in Tacoma and Lakewood when I was at Pierce Transit, and beating Republicans in Olympia when they tried to swipe $500 million from our region from transit funding. So this is something that's important to me, and my two priorities are to deliver Sound Transit 3 on time and faster if possible, and to go big on housing around transit. It means that we need to build 70,000 units across the city and in particular around transit stations, and it means we need to prevent displacement. And if we're going to really leverage and utilize our transit investments, we really need to get the housing piece right, because the displacement that occurred as we built Sound Transit in the South End is heartbreaking and can't be repeated as we build it on the west side of the city.
Thank you. Lorena Gonzalez.
Another issue that's very personal to me as a West Seattle resident is the issues related to the alignment of ST3. We have as far as I understand, about a $6 billion gap in the budget as a result of the COVID recession. So that creates a real problem in terms of how we are going to deliver on the promise to the voters. The biggest problem, as I see it, is that ST3 board is making decisions about a 100-year project on information that is still evolving today. That's a mistake. We should not compromise our commitment to build a system of light rail that is interconnected and that will last a generation based on what we know in this moment. We need to go slow in terms of making those realignment decisions and not compromise on eliminating stations and terminals that are going to be critical to making sure that we meet our climate goals and be a carbon emission-free city. So for me, the priority will be to make sure that I advocate as mayor for the people of this city who are asking for this connection to happen on time from West Seattle to Ballard, and that's what I will do. I will make the case every single day with as much commitment as I am doing now to make sure that our folks are being served and that the region understands why it's a mistake to make decisions that are long-term based on short-term information.
Thank you. And Bruce Harrell.
Thank you. Quite honestly, I didn't mind going last on this question. So as we look at 40 new stations or so, I think station location and how we go about that working with communities is going to be absolutely critical. Some of the work that I did on the Chinatown International District station issue, where we have basically 4 solutions, 4th Avenue or 5th Avenue, above grade, below grade, sort of begs the question about accessibility in stations. And so what I will make sure is prioritized that we really look at not only who's using light rail, but how accessible it is. Business mitigation is something that was slightly mentioned. I led the efforts to create a $50 million fund for Rainier Valley when light rail was constructed above grade on the south end. So I think our business mitigation strategies, and I've been on record supporting that, it's going to be critical as we look at how SG3 is going to roll out and the impact on small businesses. And the last thing I would just mention is we continue to look at the central link, the central connector downtown, that I think the city is sort of looking at the aerial way problem that, of course, we're having. I'm fully supportive of the connector link, and I think that, again, more attention needs to be put on our core areas as we improve the connector link, in addition to the 4th, 5th stations and the other 40 stations that are going to come online.
All right. Our next question, we're going to start with Lance Randall. The question is about pedestrian infrastructure, and I'm combining this with an audience question a little bit. Move Seattle is falling short of its promises, and relying on individual private development is piecemeal and often exempt from improvements. With current funding, it will take centuries to complete Seattle's sidewalk network. What is your plan to build Seattle's missing sidewalks and accessible curb ramps and crossings, and how should it be funded?
Well, again, I talked about reviewing the transportation priorities of that levy to move Seattle, which is about $930 million. And we have to adjust those priorities because of what happened during COVID-19. And in adjusting those priorities, we need to focus on the neighborhoods that need the infrastructure improvements the most as we make those adjustments. But in doing so, we have to provide accountable oversight in the rehabilitation of these roads and sidewalks and, of course, our bridge. So we need to make sure that whatever's been planned through this levy, that we keep, that we hold people accountable to make sure things get done. Of course, we also need to review the bicycle master plan to determine the funding that we're going to need for access and safety, and to make sure that we're running the bike lanes in appropriate places so that everyone is safe. But I think the main thing that we have to do is get back to the basics. This means that we have to focus on these improvements with the roads and the sidewalks and use the money wisely that we've generated through the levy to make sure that we're meeting the basic needs of the communities to keep everybody safe as they travel along the corridors that we're supposed to maintain.
Justin Farrell.
Building out our pedestrian network is simply about priorities. We are able to unleash literally tens of billions of dollars of transportation funding, and it is absolutely about what the mayor's priorities are and what the city council's priorities are. We have an opportunity to work with the state to make sure that their next package has improvements like the Northgate pedestrian bridge that I fought for as a legislator, as well as safe routes to school, but so much more beyond that. We need to make sure that we're using those precious funding sources that are for multimodal improvements like car tabs and vehicle license fees to be funding pedestrian improvements. Yes, we need to fix our bridges, but there are other ways we can fix those. So as mayor, it will be a high priority, as I've mentioned already, to get us to Vision Zero. And a core part of that is going big on funding our sidewalks in the neighborhoods that have been begging and pleading for sidewalks now for decades.
Thank you. Next, Lorena Gonzalez.
Sorry, I got a notice saying my internet connection was unstable, so I was waiting for that to pass. You know, I think this has been an unfortunate situation where we have not fulfilled all of our commitments under the Levy to Move Seattle. But I think that the next mayor's challenge is going to be to figure out how to deliver on as much of the projects that remain as possible. And as mayor, I would be committed to rolling over those projects that we weren't able to complete into the renewed proposal to renew the Move Seattle levy. In addition to that, we know that we continue to have significant needs around rapid ride, bike lanes, pedestrian projects. And so the next levy is not only going to have to backfill the projects that we didn't complete, but also add on top of that and supplement it to make sure that we are continuing to, again, have that revenue source we need in order to build that 15-minute city that I believe most Seattleites want to live in, that will help our climate, that will achieve greater equity goals, and that will make our city a place where people can both live and work without relying on a single occupancy vehicle.
Thanks. Next, Bruce Harrell.
Thank you. So I certainly agree with everything that I've heard, but I think the common theme that is reoccurring is money, 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 lack of revenue, lack of resources. If our backlog is close to $1 billion and it's going to take us hundreds of years to create the pedestrian experience that we want to see throughout the city, how are we going to pay for it? Yes, vehicle license fees is one measure, and I would support that. I would support any available revenue that we can do to do what we need to do. We open up the data so the public could see if we are asking for more taxes that we needed. I take a different approach also when it comes to the fact that we are one of the richest cities in the country. We are one of the richest counties in the country. And with that particular hand that we have, I talk about philanthropic dollars, and I talk about the obligation that large employers have, large businesses have to give back to the community, to help us with the infrastructure. And so under my plan for not only homelessness, but some of our infrastructure needs, you will see me aggressively tap into the corporate social responsibility measures of organizations as well, in addition to the tax revenue. We should not have outdated, underdeveloped, or non-existent sidewalks if we want the pedestrian experience that all our residents should have. So you'll see not only a taxing mechanism, but you'll see philanthropic efforts on my part, should I be elected as mayor.
Andrew?
So, ready?
Absolutely.
Great. So we already have the data. We know that 20% of the city lacks sidewalks. It is also something where even where we do have sidewalks, and I can say this living on Capitol Hill, that there are a number of areas where the sidewalks are currently not complying with ADA. We also have a consent decree from the federal government to actually install a certain number of sidewalks each and every year. My priority is to really fulfill those promises that were done in the past, to increase our general fund in any way possible, to actually execute all those projects that were part of the Seattle or the Move Seattle levy before our next renewal. Because one of my biggest fears is that we're going to have an electorate that says, hey, you didn't actually do what you did or what you said you were going to be promised to do, so why should we actually renew this? And we're going to end up in this horrible cycle of not investing enough. The other thing that I am really interested in and would have to dig into more is that we have our utility bonds, limited tax general obligation bonds, to the tune of about $6 billion. And we also recognize that we need to decarbonize our city, and that includes removing natural gas infrastructure in our streets. So is there a way to do some work between Seattle Public Utilities as well as SDOT to really move forward and upgrade all of our streets, including infrastructure for pedestrians and sidewalks?
Our next question is going to go first to Justin Farrell. Major cities from Paris to Los Angeles are contemplating free public transit. Some, like Tallinn, Estonia, and the entire country of Luxembourg already have it. Olympia's intercity transit went fare free starting in January 2020. Do you agree with this goal? And if so, what will you do to pursue free transit in Seattle and our region?
I absolutely, and with a great amount of enthusiasm, agree with this goal. And the great news is that in Seattle, we have already experienced this with great public support. I look at the downtown fare-free zone that was available to all of us for so long. I look at the UPass program where that community has virtually free transit. Free transit is a core component to getting us to net zero, and it is a core component to racial equity in our system and access, and decriminalizing the use of our transit system. So free fares across our transit systems are really important. So that means as we are looking at our next Metro ballot measure in particular, we need to be looking at that. Fare box recovery does create some cash for sure, but at the end of the day, that's a cost that we need to be able to absorb as we're looking at our next funding. We also need to be, as we're bringing on new transit stations, sound transit stations, really being in driving efficiencies around how our bus network is connecting with those and putting those efficiencies into fare-free transit. So we are going to get there, and it is going to be a really important part of my agenda.
Thank you. Let's go next. You'd think I'd have this memorized to Lorena Gonzalez.
I almost have it memorized at this point. Okay. So I love this question. I think the goal should be free public transit. You know, when I think about the options of choosing either transit or cars, you know, I think the reality is that even if we build a city in which our transit network is the transit network of our dreams, it's still expensive for many working class families to pay for transit. I read recently that about 16% of an individual's budget goes towards public transit costs, and for a family, that's closer to about 18% of their income. So I think it's important for us to be committed as we're building this vision around a 15-minute city, which includes a network of public transit, that public transit system should be free to the people who are using it. In many ways, it isn't free. We're all paying taxes every single day to pay for the infrastructure that those buses use, and we're paying in taxes in other ways to build this public transit system that currently exists. So I absolutely would be committed to making sure that we initiate every effort we can to accomplish the goal of free public transit. We have examples through, you know, I think Kansas City, Missouri has done this here in America, and I think we should be learning from other European cities on exactly how to make sure we deliver on a zero fare effort for our public transit system as a key way to help our working class families.
Thank you. Next, Bruce Harrell.
Thank you. So in agreement that free transit, and I mentioned earlier in another question, exploring even the stronger east-west connections, remembering that everyone lives within a reasonable amount of a transit line. Many people do, but many people do not. So also looking at how we can look at some of the other connectivity issues associated with people who cannot afford or it's inconvenient to get to the transit line. I would also say that while we buy the hours, because that's what we will have to do is buy the hours, we have to also look at the risk of using the word incrementalism, some incremental steps we can get there. And that would be whether we can, again, encourage the electrification of cars that will be commonplace in 5 or 10 years to make sure that there's software available packages where people are still working, that we do two things. Number one, we encourage carpooling, number one. But number two, that employers learn to stagger their hours and work with the communities, the commuter community, such that what we've learned from COVID is many people will work from home. So can we continue to have that flexibility of working at home and even flexibility in hours such that we can make sure that the commuting experience is reasonable? So I go to the fact that not only do we want free transit for everyone, east-west, but also look at what COVID has taught us in terms of work at home options.
Thank you. Andrew Grant Houston.
So I think it's important to note that free transit is something that is going to increase the number of people who take the bus, but actually not by much. Really what it is focused on is it's a justice issue. And so what does actually increase the number of people who ride the bus is improving the infrastructure related to getting to a bus or transit stop. That is why when I proposed putting the VLF back on the ballot in 2022, what I'm really thinking about is the fact that King County Metro operates in the entire county. And so once we pass that VLF in 2022, we should be working with our county partners to actually pass for free transit in 2023 or 2024. When we do that, we can also use funds here within Seattle to then focus at least half of that existing VLF to go into improving those infrastructure and that first and last mile connections. That is how we ensure that not only are we creating a free transit system, we're also creating one where people still don't have to wait half an hour to an hour to get to a bus, not only in Seattle, but also throughout the county where a number of people who either work in Seattle or who have been displaced from Seattle currently reside.
Thank you. And last on this question, Lance Randall.
Well, yes, the idea of free transit for all is very interesting, but we have to keep in mind that someone has to pay the bills for the infrastructure, the bills for the maintenance of the buses, the people who operate the vehicles and what have you. I do see where we are subsidizing or looking to subsidize people who need assistance to be able to pay for their fares to ride our mass transportation. But we have a tendency to get ourselves in trouble trying to offer free to everyone, especially when we just said we have one of the most wealthy cities in the country and one of the most wealthy counties, which means that someone has to pay the bills. So I think we need to be very careful as we begin to talk about free things to try to accomplish a goal. We need to make sure that not only is it free, or if it's going to be free, it has to be fair, because someone has to pay the bills to take care of the infrastructure. So it's a novel idea to take a look at. If we can get the infrastructure put in place, paid for, which we have a long way to go. And then, of course, we have to partner with King County and other municipalities who the buses travel through. I mean, you know, is it just going to be free in Seattle? It's going to be free everywhere. So we have to really be very careful as we talk about this and make sure that we are crossing all the T's and putting it, make sure all the I's are dotted when we talk about doing something like this. So I'm in favor of continuing to try to subsidize people that need it. The free approach, I'm a little skeptical because somebody has to pay for all this infrastructure and people in driving and what have you. So let's be careful as we talk about that.
All right. Our next question is about automatic enforcement cameras. Mayor Jenny Durkin has been slow to roll out automatic enforcement cameras as authorized by the state legislature in a pilot that runs until mid-2023. Camera enforcement could reduce bus lane cheating and blocking the box when motorists block the crosswalk that people, especially disabled people, need to cross the street. How will you implement the pilot program, and would you like to see a permanent program? What about expanding this to include cameras on bike lanes to deter motorists from blocking bike lanes? And we will start with Lorena Gonzalez.
Yes and yes, and I would just do it. It shouldn't be, I don't think we need a pilot project to know that this is something that is effective. So, I think for me, it would be a priority to just simply implement it and pull together the plan to take automated enforcement to scale. Of course, we have to continue to comply with the law, and to the extent that the state legislature hasn't given us permission to do automatic enforcement in particular areas, then I would work together with a coalition to make sure that we are championing those legislative changes to allow us to do that. I will also say, though, that I think it's really important for us to continue to keep equity in mind and to make sure that we are not creating any disproportionate or disparate impacts on low-income or people of color throughout the city who might be targeted through the automated enforcement. So, but I'm a big believer in it, and I think we can do it, and I think we should do it, and I think we should make sure that we are centering the implementation of that program with a strong sense of equity and making sure we address any potential racial impacts.
Thank you. Bruce Harrell.
Thank you. So if given the legislative relief that I'd like to see, yes, I believe in, I actually mentioned this earlier, the use of automated enforcement. Again, it removes police bias. It creates a new cultural norm or driving norm in certain areas. However, we shouldn't rely on it too much, because that is not a problem-solving approach. That is an enforcement approach. And in a problem-solving approach that we would carry out under my administrations, we look at if people are routinely doing something wrong, then we must look at why they are routinely doing something wrong. And that's how we do address any race and social justice impacts or just bad behavior. So that's where the built environment comes in, and whether we have other ways to traffic calm or make sure that based on the construction of the lane that left turns are safe, etc. So we want to make sure that our philosophy is one of a problem-solving approach, not a revenue-generating approach. And like Lorena said, that again, any racial or social justice issues need to be closely monitored. And that's how we would do it. It will be a somewhat granular approach, but certainly the use of this technology has proven to be fruitful in certain areas to save lives.
Thanks. Andrew Grant Houston.
Addressing another Durkin delay. Yes, I believe that we should enforce this. I also agree that we need to work with our state legislative partners in order to actually expand it, to have it in more places. And similar to previous candidates, as an urban designer, I understand that we actually need to design the environment in order to actually reduce the number of people who choose to violate the law. They feel that they can get away with it. And I know firsthand, living here near the light rail station on Capitol Hill, that even though we do have cameras that enforce, we still have a number of accidents and injuries that come from people who are just trying to rush and just trying to get through the red light. Camera be damned. And so it's really about not just making it more difficult for people to drive, and of course, looking at that with an equity lens and being very clear about what we're doing, being transparent about why or why not we might not implement something, for example, like congestion pricing, but also providing those other opportunity or those other options that we do want people to use. In other words, making it easier for people to bus, making it easier for people to bike, and easier for people to walk and roll across the city.
Thank you. Lance Randall is next.
So as I mentioned before, my priority is to make sure we upgrade our traffic movement signal crosswalk technology and to improve safety. And it does include lights and cameras to make sure that we're catching people who are violating, these rules, these traffic rules, to keep people safe and protected. But I think it needs to be a combination as we begin to take a look at where we want to place these lights in order to make sure that we're accomplishing the mission of keeping everyone safe. And be very strategic about where we're going to put them. But I think as we drive around the city of Seattle, me and my colleagues, there are plenty of places that we know, we see all the time, that should have had some type of reconfiguration a long time ago. And it's time to stop delaying doing the work and go ahead and instructing our departments, SDOT, to go out and upgrade these particular sites. And also, we need to do more monitoring of certain corridors to make sure that we're keeping track of the speeds that are coming through, so that we can make sure that we put these cameras in the appropriate places. Again, I'm concerned about privacy. I'm also concerned about the fact that, you know, we need to make sure that people are not being overburdened with fees. I think we've mentioned about that. We need to make sure that people are not going to be harmed financially as we try to put technology in place to keep people safe. So let's look at all options in a combination to try to keep people safe, including the traffic cameras.
Thanks. And Justin Farrell.
Thank you. As Vice Chair of the Transportation Committee, as a legislator, I led on the work to authorize pilot projects for traffic cameras. And I think that we need to use the same kind of North Stars on this that we used in Olympia to get Republicans and others on board, but it has to be data driven. We have to be willing to put them in the places where there are high accident locations and pedestrian safety is really compromised. We also have to be looking at putting cameras where other safety and built environment treatments won't work. One of the things I'm really concerned about is that automatic safety cameras become an excuse not to make the bigger capital investments to build out our pedestrian safety network, to make sure we're protecting cyclists, to make sure that transit lanes are, you know, that transit has their own lanes. So I am very much in favor of traffic safety cameras. I have fought for them in the past, and they need to be part of a comprehensive solution. They are not the one and only thing that is going to lead us to some kind of nirvana around bike and pedestrian safety and transit efficiency. We really have to be looking at it holistically, and we have to be involving community in where our highest priorities go so that we aren't compromising equity in any way. So those would be my priorities in pushing for traffic safety cameras.
Thank you. Unless I am losing track, I think that was everybody on that question. I apologize, I'm looking for some audience questions for the next few minutes. And actually, I'll start with an audience question about youth and climate change. And we'll start with Bruce Harrell. Youth are going to bear the brunt of the climate crisis. How have you or will you include youth in your policies so they can self-determine their future? And do you support Seattle being a carbon negative city?
Man, I was hoping I got a little. I like being a little last. Good time to warm up here. So number one, how do you bring in the voice of the youth? Well, I think I've done that my entire life, and I think that the youth are incredibly frustrated and angry at the contradictions they see in society. And so I spent countless hours understanding their anger because I was once a youth and I had the same anger. So their voice is critically important, and through team building, through forums, through networks, through meeting after meeting, we will certainly incorporate their voice in policy making. That is what the Race and Social Justice Initiative was all about, that I sponsored, was making sure all voices are at the table to achieve equity. Will I commit to a carbon negative city, as I think was the question? Well, I haven't been, certainly carbon neutral, yes, but when we say carbon negative, quite frankly, that's not a term that I'm hearing a lot. But it certainly sounds like we want to head in that direction such that we are, again, a global leader in our fight against climate change. And if that is the point of that question, certainly yes.
All right. Next in the order, as they say in meetings, stalling for a second here. Andrew Grant Houston is next.
So when it comes to involving youth in my campaign, I have my own youth team that includes paid fellowships. I also have the endorsement of the Sunrise High School Hubs, and so that's high schools all across Washington State, and received that endorsement with over 80% of the vote. It's something where I myself am the only millennial candidate here. I'm 32 years old, and even though I am a member of the Sunrise Movement, and a lot of people ask, well, you're not that young, why don't you wait another 2 cycles before you run? as we have seen from last year's wildfire crisis, and as we will see this year, it's not something where we can actually wait for the change that we need to see. It's something that we are living with the crisis right now. And in our city, especially with our strong mayor system, we need someone who isn't just going to listen to the youth, but is a part of that movement and change. The other thing that I bring is my experience as an architect and project manager, as someone who has managed multi-million-dollar projects across the city. And so I've accomplished a lot in my few years, and I look forward to accomplishing more, working with my colleagues in the Sunrise Movement, as well as those in Gen Z.
Great. Lance Randall.
So it's very important for us to keep the youth in mind as we step into the role as mayor of the city, because everything that we're going to be doing should be designed to make a better future for them. And the best way to keep them involved is to have them to be a part of our planning and our development of solutions to deal with our climate issue. The youth are very, very aware of what's going on, and they ask a lot of questions, and they're concerned about the climate and our planet. So we need to make sure that we include them in any decision that we're making. I've been doing that for a while, working with the youth. I was part of a beautiful Safe Place for Youth program down in Rainier Beach, working with the youth to keep people safe and protected, and also as corner greeters, these youth being involved in transportation and keeping an eye on the streets and greeting people. A very, very good program that gets youth involved so they understand what we're dealing with and to keep them engaged in the process. So yes, we have to keep them involved. I had proposed an idea of putting together a youth advisory committee where we would have the youth from across the city that would have access to me. We would sit around and talk about issues that are important to them. And I know important issues such as climate change would come to the table, and carbon footprint. Carbon negativity is something that we need to strive for, but we need to make sure we keep our youth and young people engaged as we go forward to create a more sustainable future for them.
We're at time on that one. Jess and Farrell.
So I'm the mom of 3 kids, and we talk often about how climate change is going to impact their future. And whether, what food distribution is going to look like, what will be the situation with water in the Cascades, forest fires. This is a very real thing in the minds of young people. And it is now time, as I said earlier, the hour is late on our ability to deliver net zero. Let's do that first, and then let's get to carbon negative. And one of the things, so we've had young people involved in our campaign. We have a 10-page climate plan. And one of the ideas that came out of discussions with young people was a commitment to a youth jobs guarantee as we are transitioning to a green economy. And that means, of course, the infrastructure jobs that have been so important, but really making sure that young people have access to those jobs, not just construction, but also design and architecture. And then really expanding what we mean by green jobs. Any job that is inherently low carbon, artists, caregivers, teachers, childcare workers, those jobs should also be prioritized as we're thinking about green investments, and we're thinking about the economic stability, living wages, healthcare, paid sick leave, paid family leave. We need to be investing and committing to young people that they are going to have economic security as well as climate security.
Thank you. Lorena Gonzalez.
Thank you so much. I think the question is really about climate justice and how we're going to include the youth in our efforts related to climate justice. And I think that for me, it would be important as mayor to make sure that I am using the network that currently exists of youth who are really engaged and active in this issue. So there's the Youth for Climate Justice Action. They, before COVID, were protesting outside of City Hall very frequently. I think it was on every Friday. But I also want to lift up the Cities Get Engaged program that actually bakes our youth into our boards and commissions that are designed to advise the mayor and the council on actual policy solutions that we should be championing. And I think that that's an important opportunity to either develop a sort of a clear commitment to how we're going to bake in those youth voices into policy-making functions, not just on the policy side, but also on the budget side. And then as it relates to carbon negative, listen, if Microsoft and IKEA have already committed to carbon negative, not just carbon neutral, but carbon negative by 2030, then the city of Seattle should also commit to that. So this is about vision, and it's about what we're willing to strive for and what we're willing to fight for. And I do think that the next 10 years are critical for us in terms of turning the clock backwards on the realities of climate change. So I think we should be striving for carbon negative.
Next, Bruce Harrell.
I went first on that one, Erica.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Trying to juggle all these questions.
My answer must not have been earth-shattering for you to forget it all. That's okay.
You know, I kind of go into a fugue state during these forums trying to keep everything straight, so I apologize. The next question is a reader question, and then, a viewer question. And then we're gonna go to some quick lightning round yes and no questions, and then probably wrap up after that. Lucinda asks, what role does Seattle and the mayor play in influencing major fossil fuel infrastructure being constructed within the region, such as Puget Sound Energy's LNG refinery facility being constructed, operating illegally on Puyallup tribal lands? And Bruce, you're going to get to go last on this one. We'll start with Andrew.
I think a big part of that is recognizing that we have the Office of Intergovernmental Relations for a reason, and that is also to work with tribes that are in the area, not just other states or other counties. And so we need to be working with our partners of the Puyallup tribe in order to actually ensure that that project does not happen. It is something where we should not be building in new infrastructure, and actually the data and the research that comes out from a lot of climate leaders says that we need to stop investing in new fossil fuel infrastructure if we're actually going to achieve a goal of having our temperature not increase more than 1.5 degrees centigrade on average. The other thing that I am really focused on is actually part of my proposal is the fact that we need to turn Puget Sound Energy into a public utility, similar to Seattle Public Light, or Seattle City Light, I apologize. It is something where if we're actually going to decarbonize and remove natural gas from a number of our buildings that are existing in the city and from within our streets, we actually need to be working with a public institution. For them right now, it's all about their bottom line, and they're going to fight us tooth and nail to actually do that kind of work. And so if we are going to meet our goals, we need to actually decarbonize our existing buildings. And that means removing natural gas and creating PSC into a PUD.
Thank you. Next, Lance Randall.
And so the city of Seattle has a long reputation of being a leader on environmental issues. And these next years are going to be very important and critical as we continue to address these issues. So we need to take advantage of the opportunity to reassert ourselves as a regional leader and a national worldwide leader when it comes to the type of policies that are important for building a sustainable future. One of the things we must make sure that we do is continue to partner with the Duwamish Valley Action Plan to address these economic issues and job creation opportunities. We need to make sure that the environment is healthy, the transportation, mobility, capacity building, public safety, everything is in place. But we need to make sure that we are part of the region as a leader to try to make sure that we keep fossil fuels and certain type of facilities out of our region that are designed to harm our residents and our businesses, so that people will know that we are serious about what we're trying to accomplish. But we need to also maintain that our Duwamish people and the history needs to be acknowledged, and we need to continue to work with them on the strategies to make sure that the environment is clean as we continue to move forward.
Justin Farrell.
Thank you very much. This is absolutely an issue where Seattle needs to be both a regional and state partner. I'm proud of the endorsements I have from leading environmentalists like State Lands Commissioner Hillary Franz, Ryan Mello, King County, as Pierce County Council member. And sometimes Seattle needs to play a lead role. For example, we need to clean up our own carbon house. That is one of the best ways we can be a leader in this state and in this region. And then, you know, really take the lead from what our partners are asking us to do. In some situations, taking a bolder stance may be helpful, but in other times, you know, playing a quieter role. And so having the relationships with tribal governments, with county governments, with our state government, those things really matter, and being able to be a team player is really important. But fundamentally, the best thing that this city can be doing right now is showing how to clean up our own house and how to get to net zero. We have been using words around this for a long time. We have been making commitments for a very long time, and it is time to turn words into action.
Thanks. Lorena Gonzalez.
Thank you for this really important question. You know, I recently read that while cars are still producing the greatest amount of carbon emissions, there's two other things that are most recently shown to be increasing carbon emissions in our area. One of those things is fossil gas used in buildings. And that is why it is important to me to make sure that we continue to be committed to banning the future infrastructure development of pipelines of fossil gas into our residential and commercial buildings. I am proud to be endorsed in this race by former Councilmember Mike O'Brien, and worked with him, who worked with this coalition when we were looking at the City Council to create a pathway forward in order to effectuate that ban. And I will say that I'm also a strong labor advocate and believe that any kind of ban of fossil gas infrastructure in the future must include a just transition plan. And I will work with the Office of Sustainability and Environment to make sure that we are including those perspectives of impacted labor workforce to make sure that we are transitioning them to a greener economy, and that includes the infrastructure related to how we are building and constructing our buildings to prevent the use of fossil gas for generations to come.
Great, and finally, Bruce Harrell.
Thank you. So I think, as we all know, our fight against climate change, our fight to save our planet and our air and our water is a long fight, and it starts with education as well. And so I will talk a little bit about education. The first being the undisputable fact that natural gas is a hydrocarbon. It's a fossil fuel, much like oil and coal and other fossil fuels, and that looking at our educational system, we need to teach that, and our youth and our younger generation needs to understand that. And then our policies then reflect that accordingly. I think that when we look at what's causing climate change, that even in the natural gas vernacular, that people still get confused as whether that is a fossil fuel or not. So when I look at the work that needs to be done, I think the question is, what can the city do? The city could work very closely with our educational institutions. We change behavior, we change policies. Our politicians and our decision makers of tomorrow will be the students of today. And so if we again look at the longer fight that we again, I grew up not littering because I was taught as a kid, you do not litter. And we look at the learned behavior that our young leaders will have. I think that we were going to have fierce climate change advocates. But that's what we can do right now, making sure that we're concentrating on the long game as we look at natural gas.
Thank you. All right. So now we're going to go into the yes, no, and very, very short answer questions. And I'm going to just call out people's names. I'm going to call out your names every time. I know that may be annoying, but it is helpful for people who are just listening to this forum or who are visually impaired. We're going to start with a question about zoning. Will you legalize apartments in more neighborhoods to create a more affordable, sustainable, and transit-oriented city? Lance Randall.
Yes.
Justin Farrell,
Yes.
Lorena Gonzalez,
Yes.
Bruce Harrell,
Yes.
Andrew Houston.
Yes, in all neighborhoods.
Do you support decriminalizing fare non-payment on Sound Transit trains and buses? Lance Randall,
No.
Justin Farrell,
Yes.
Lorena Gonzalez,
Yes.
Bruce Harrell,
Yes.
Andrew Houston.
Yes.
What is your primary mode of transportation? Lance Randall,
The link rail.
Justin Farrell,
Pre-COVID, it was Link. Now it's walking.
Lorena Gonzalez,
Sea Line 55 and the 50.
Bruce Harrell,
Electric car.
and Andrew Houston.
Walking and the link, I don't know how to drive.
Do you support the Safe and Healthy Streets program? And would you make the 25 miles of Stay Healthy Streets and Keep Moving Streets on Alki Point, Lake Washington Boulevard, and Green Lake permanent? Lance Randall,
No.
Justin Farrell,
Yes.
Lorena Gonzalez,
Yes, already working on it. And I would also make sure that they are not mixed modality.
Bruce Harrell,
So we get to narrate on these questions or not? I thought we just yes.
Four answers.
Put one in there. Just keep it brief.
Oh, no. Yes.
Andrew,
Yes, and I'd like to acquire some of the land along Lake Washington Boulevard for social housing.
all right. Let's not go crazy with these short answers. Next question. Should the city continue to pursue a road pricing system? Lance Randall,
No.
Justin Farrell,
Maybe.
Lorena Gonzalez,
Yes.
Bruce Harrell,
Yes, with a race and social justice lens.
Andrew Houston.
No, it's inequitable.
Should metros consider smaller buses to use as feeders to mass transit? Lance Randall,
Yes.
Justin Farrell,
I know too much, but yes.
Lorena Gonzalez,
Yes.
Bruce Harrell,
Yes.
Andrew Houston.
Yes.
Would you push legislation to expand transit benefits to lower wage or part-time workers who work for large companies? Lance Randall,
Yes.
Justin Farrell,
Free transit, but until we get that, yes.
Lorena Gonzalez,
Yes.
Bruce Harrell,
Yes.
Andrew Houston.
Yes, until free transit.
Do you support ranked choice voting? Lance Randall,
Maybe.
Justin Farrell,
Yes.
Lorena Gonzalez,
Yes.
Bruce Harrell,
Not sure yet.
and Andrew Houston.
Yes.
As mayor, will you finish the downtown streetcar connection from Capitol Hill to South Lake Union? Lance Randall. I don't know who laughed, but I will start with Lance.
I was coughing.
Oh,
No.
Justin Farrell,
Yes.
Lorena Gonzalez,
Absolutely.
Bruce Harrell,
Yes.
and Andrew Houston.
Yes.
Will you commit to requiring SDOT, Seattle Department of Transportation, to increase maintenance of our roads and bridges? Lance Randall,
Yes.
Justin Farrell,
Yes, with federal and state partnership.
Lorena Gonzalez,
Yes.
Bruce Harrell,
Yes.
Andrew Houston.
Yes, but not at the expense of other mobility options.
Should police be involved in traffic enforcement? Lance Randall,
Yes.
Justin Farrell,
In some cases, but not all.
Lorena Gonzalez,
No.
Bruce Harrell,
A limited role.
and Andrew Houston.
No.
Okay, next one is a two-part question, but try to keep it brief. Do you support creating new bus-only lanes in the city? And if so, would you remove parking or replace general traffic lanes to accommodate new bus-only lanes? Lance Randall.
Yes.
And which would you do? Remove parking or replace general traffic lanes?
Replace the general lanes.
Justin Farrell.
Yes, all of the above.
Lorena Gonzalez.
Yes, both.
Bruce Harrell.
Yes, both on an individualized basis, yes.
And Andrew Houston.
Yes, both. Already made a map for it.
And then last yes, no question. Do you support lidding I-5? Lance Randall.
Yes.
Justin Farrell.
Enthusiastic, yes.
Lorena Gonzalez.
Yes.
Bruce Harrell.
Yes.
And Andrew Houston.
Yes, but given the cost, housing comes first.
Thank you all, particularly the candidates, for keeping to time. Thanks to everyone who participated and watched this forum on Facebook Live. And now, sadly, our time has come to an end. And I just want to remind everybody that the primary election is on August 3rd, so make sure and vote. And now we'll turn it back over to the hosts with the Mass Coalition.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And a big thanks to Erica T. Barnett of Publicoa for being our excellent moderator. She's done a lot of these and she's doing an excellent job. I can see why she keeps getting the invites. Let me just pull up my notes. I've been frantically live tweeting. The primary election for Mayor of Seattle is August 3rd. So look out for your ballots in the mail in mid-July and make sure to vote. And we'd like to thank again all of our co-sponsoring organizations, which include 350 Seattle Action, Cascade Bicycle Club, Seattle Neighborhood Greenways, Seattle Subway, Sunrise Seattle, Transportation Choices Coalition, Transit Riders Union, and the Urbanists. And I'm Doug Trum, Executive Director of the Urbanists, so that's us. And if you missed any part of the live stream tonight or would like to share with friends, we'll be sharing a recording and transcript via email to all registrants, and we'll also put it on social media. And also another plug to join us next week for our forum with the City Council Position 3 candidates, the open seat. And those candidates are Nikita Oliver, Brianna Thomas, and Sarah Nelson. And it's Tuesday, June 22nd at 5 p.m. Thank you for joining us and have a great evening.